Hi everyone, this is Arbat from the YouTube channel Starpath Academy. Hopefully the video quality is okay as well as the sound. So if you've joined the live, please let me know about especially the sound quality. 1 to 5, rated 5 for really good, 1 for pretty bad. I had to restart the stream once, so I don't know. Yeah, I would really appreciate that. So I guess let's talk about the elderly during high inflationary times Romania in the 90s. This is a repeating theme. I have been asked about this quite some time, and I mean, there's always more that we can share, right? So let's take this question, and I'm also taking live questions as well. So feel free to ask questions in the chat. Make sure to like the video and share. The question goes Six Sigma asks, what happened to the elderly when their pension could no longer purchase anything? So, just to give you a little bit of context, right? Most of the people, and that means like over 95%, if not more, were on government pensions, which was the best thing ever, the only thing you should have during communism, and so on and so forth. So everyone was on government pension, right? The safest thing to have. During communism, of course, communism fell, and eventually hyperinflation ensued. So high inflation was there already. Um, and people were living in fairly poor conditions already. So what happened, of course, when the high inflation happened was that the government pensions did not keep up with the inflation. So that is where the problem came from, right? So again, just to give you context, I repeated this many times in previous videos, but just to go with the loaf of bread, the price of loaf of bread, which went from 1 2 Romanian lei to over 10,000 Romanian lei eventually during the 7 years or after the 7 years. So you can imagine if you had any savings, that would have been wiped out by inflation. In the sense, the purchasing power would have been wiped out by inflation completely. So they did adjust the pensions to inflation, but that was never catching up, of course. I mean, inflation was out of control. So, to give you a concrete example, if somebody would have worked like over 30 years during communism in a factory, made good paying job, I mean, relatively good paying job, and they would have been able to support a family of four or something like that, the pension eventually after hyperinflation, that pension that they would have got would not cover the food cost per month, right? So the monthly food cost would not be covered that with that pension. So everyone had to kind of do other things, and which meant like even after you were older than 86 years old, you still had to work. Now that meant usually that you had to work on the field or in the garden or something like that, raising chickens, providing food for yourself, and even sell food to the people who lived in cities in order to survive, right? So, and that was common, um the elderly were also, most of them lived outside of the city limits, right? However, there were some that lived inside of the cities, and that was mostly because during communism, the land was basically taken. And depending on where the property was, if it was sought after by government, then they would immediately take it. As long as you had the right political opinions, I guess during communism, they would compensate you with a um, 2 bedroom apartment in the city. So they would take your house, They would take your land, but you would be compensated with a two-bedroom apartment, and and possibly a job, right? At a factory or something like that. So, some people, some elderly, were put into cities because of that, and they had it the worst, to be honest, because didn't have land or any means to produce food. Um, the general rule was that people, like the children and grandchildren, were the one who were taking care of the elderly. So that was pretty much the case, I would say 80% of the time. 80% of the time, if not more. Um, and that meant, I mean, that was also workable because people had at least four children, right? So four children, um, maybe each of them had like two grandchildren, three grandchildren. So it was very common for people, if the grandparent lived outside of the city, like in our case, even before it got really bad, we would take turns and go on some weekends to the place, right, to my where my grandmother lived, and we would work on the field for her. That was very common. So either we would go, my aunt would go, or my uncles would go, or together. So that was very, very common that we would help her, take care of the land, and so she could live off of it, right? That was very, very common. In the case for the people who lived inside cities, what happened was that well, they helped monetarily, right? During hyperinflation, many people have left Romania, so they worked abroad, may that be Germany or other place, right? And they would send some money back to take care of the grandparents. Now that helped, of course, but it didn't really help. I mean, you were not physically there, so you couldn't help her in other ways that might have been even more necessary, I would say. So the city situation was a bit dire. Many elderly had to sell their apartments that they may have gotten from the government. That was after they have taken the land, of course, um, in the midst of hyperinflation, right? So during that time, even though everything hyperinflated, relative cost or relative value of the real estate has went down compared to food and compared to many other things. So they would sell their apartments in order to pay rent and food. But as soon as inflation kicked up again, it wouldn't last that for maybe a year, 2 years, or something like that. Um, so imagine that, right? You have fully paid off apartment or something like that. You sell it and it's not good enough for food and rent for a year or something like that. So in those cases, unfortunately, those people were forced out. Of course, it was kind of sad because they still stuck around the flats or the apartment buildings where they used to live, but now they lived around it on benches and some um, other places. I mean, I remember seeing a lot of people, living on the street, of course. Um, but it was weird because it was the people who you should have, like, as a society, you should take care of. So it was kind of bad to see that. Um, of course, there were still some government programs in order to help them, to help the elderly, and these were institutions, but these were in horrid conditions. Nobody would go there by their own will. Usually, people would come and pick someone up from the street and put them there, but these buildings were old, they were crumbling. Sometimes they didn't have windows. It was not like an elderly home, it was more like a mental institution that has broken down or something like that. Imagine government has collapsed, so the funding was not there. Maybe voluntary people were there, but even then, it was hard because if you can't feed yourself, you don't really have a lot of time to volunteer. So sometimes it was the most horrible people working there, and usually it was like, well, I don't want to use harsh words, but like if somebody went there at 80 something years, you would know like within a couple of years it was kind of over. So that was there. The people who could do arrangements, if they had this apartment or house paid off, they would come up with, I guess, contracts where they would sell the right to um, purchase the apartment at a later point in time, right? So instead of selling the apartment that they lived in, the elderly, they would sell the right for someone to purchase that apartment after they have passed. So that was again very common. That way they could get some cash. Now it didn't last long, of course. It was actually better if they could agree upon certain like amount of food or a care or something like that, and you would have these lawyers like put up these contracts or whatever, and many people did that. I think that was the actual like the best case scenario for everyone involved. However, I mean, to be honest, like if you were an heir to land or apartments and you didn't take care of your parents, then maybe yeah, you should. I mean, whatever. So I don't want to put too much personal opinion here, but that was probably the best case scenario for everyone involved, because that way they would still like they could put something in the contract that would work for a longer term, and hopefully live off of that for a while. Usually, it had to be some food arrangement, or they move out into a different department together with some other older people, or ideally back into the country where they could still do some work and physical activities. So those were some schemes or tricks in order to um, I guess, resolve the situation. But I would say most of the time, like 80% of the time, grandparents were just taken care of by the children and the grandchildren. And if they lived outside of the city, then they would visit and help there. Or in the case of another grandmother that I had, she would be living with us for a year when we were in the city. Another year she would be living with my uncle. Another year she would be living with my aunt. So that way, every 3 years, you would have a grandmother living with you, right? Of course, that gets easier the more children you have, and so on and so forth. Well, I mean, I actually enjoyed it. I loved my grandmother, and I feel like I learned a lot from her. So this was actually a really good situation. I mean, uh, compared to like what some people do now, right? Even if the conditions are much better now in these elderly homes, I think yeah, grandmothers need to be together with grandchildren and enjoy the family life more, right? So I mean, that those were the cases. Now of course we can get into more details of the suffering that they had to go through when they couldn't pay the water bills, right? We talked about that, and I happen to know a lot about the water situation. Heating, when they couldn't pay the heating bill, I mean, people would just bus beyond the bus all the time. All the elderly folk would ride buses nonstop during the winter, because that is how they would be, right, out of the cold. So especially if they had like some tickets or something from the government in order to help with the free rides. They would be constantly on there. You couldn't take a bus anywhere; it was so full with people who were either they sold their home or they couldn't afford the heating bill, right? So I think I mean we can get into more details, but that would be the short answer to what happened to the elderly when their pension could no longer purchase anything. Um, Yeah. I hope that answered your question. If you have a more specific question regarding one aspect of their lives, then I could probably give you a more detailed answer or even concrete examples, of course. All right. If you are watching the live, then please like the video and share so we can have more people on commenting and asking questions in the chat because I'm gonna be answering those as well if we have any. Sven, thank you for letting me know. Looks like the video and sound quality is fine. Hi, Ahmed's wife. Thank you for joining. I really am happy that you were able to join a live chat. And thank you for all your comments under the videos. All right, another question would be how did people protect their gardens and animals from poachers? Um, right, so actually poachers wasn't that common. Um, yeah, so we did have a little bit of a system where people would take turns in order to guard the fields, right? I mean, they have like that was their pretty much their profession during those times. They were called chus in Hungarian, and usually, I mean, they had some kind of weapon, right? And that means that usually it was like a double-barreled shotgun or something like that. um they also had most likely some well, yeah, some other weapons, but that was they would basically that was mostly for nighttime, because during the daytime everybody was working on the fields anyway. And it was very rare that during the daytime something would happen. But also, if you take a look at Romanian communities or Romanian small towns, the houses tend to be fairly close together. It's not like farms in Texas or whatever, where it's like acres upon acres upon acres of land around the house, and then there's another house somewhere. It tends because of the medieval times and the Ottoman Empire invading and the Mongols invading. The structure of the small towns in Romania and Eastern Europe is a bit different, where the houses are somewhat close together. Then there's maybe the little front yard, and the backyard is very long. Um, so like there's a main road, there's houses, and there's very long backyards, which would be like maybe 2.5 acres where you would have your garden, right? Maybe your small orchard or something like that. And beyond that, that was the arable land, right? So you could walk there from the back of your house. So usually that was the one that was patrolled with two or more people, with at least one having something with them, where they were potato fields or something like that, because that has happened. Like people did come, and even from us they stole the potatoes right out of the ground during nighttime, and whether that was sometimes by hand and they just cleared the row, or sometimes if it was like a land further away, they would use equipment and like rob the whole field. So it was a problem. So you would hire someone, like multiple families would get together, and either they would appoint someone, but usually it was like someone's actual job to do this, and they would patrol the field. And that almost like you had to have that, but it was, yeah, not like nobody would really come into your garden or to your house because people were very aware and protective, and they usually had multiple dogs. So the people on the smaller towns or the rural folk, let's say, they just knew how to protect themselves. So it was rare that was something would happen, and it was also tight knit community. So it was like when somebody was traveling, you would know that they're up to something, or why did they come here, right? So people were suspicious unless somebody knew you. It would rarely happen during like around the houses. Of course, other crimes did happen that I don't want to go into in this answer, and we can talk about those, and some were more prevalent than others, of course. But basically, people were hired to take care of things. So I hope that answered your question. Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was different because you had people specialize in guarding like some type of crop, guarding some other type of crop, right? And I mean, we had that against birds and other stuff as well. Anyway, it's just the night guard needed to be much more serious. So I hope that answered your question. Let's see if we have questions from the live chat. Hi everyone, how are you doing? All right. Sammy asks, do you think the US markets will still go down or with the pump it up the next couple of months because of the midterms? Yeah, I mean, I don't give stock advice and I don't give investment advice. I have been out of the stock market since mid last year or so on, at least 90% out. I still have some minor stuff. I gave it away. I miners and some other small positions. I do believe there will have to be some pump, but I'm not gonna be swing trading it, or I'm not gonna take advantage of it. It feels to me that there's not much that they can do before the midterms, to be honest, and they're gonna be trying to win cheaper um, political points. Whether that's something around, I mean, look at now, the gun control crowd, they are going wild about doing something, trying to get a little win before the midterms, or if not, at least show their voters that they are doing something, right? I don't think they will have any um, traction, but that's something that they can do. Like, you can always write up a bill, make a big fuss, push it in the media. Hey, you need to still vote for us because um, we are the only ones who can pass this, right? Look at again like how Roe versus Wade failed or whatever. And now you really need to keep us because if not, right? So I think most like cheap political stuff, that is what they're gonna try to do. I think the economy, it's good if they can keep it up, and even then, it's more speculative drive up, in my opinion. I don't see like major shifts in the economy that would change the fundamentals. The fundamentals are still the same as they were 2 months ago. So will there be a pump? It could be. I don't know. But there will be some shenanigans around the midterms or before the midterms or redefining terms that we're not in a recession. Of course, that's a good one. You can redefine everything. Going down is good for the stock market, right? So anyway, I I'm gonna be looking it right. I'll be looking at it to take some positions, but not now, not at these prices still. All right, Dr. James Denton. So that part of the Ukraine, I guess, has stopped paying ethnic Russians their pension since 2014. I didn't know that in the Donbass. Well, yeah. Like I wrote my comment on your last video, yeah, liberating people. Well, definitely seems like that for some, right? Yeah, yeah, definitely. I can tell that um, minorities have been treated horrible since 2012. Not just Russian minorities, but also Romanian, Hungarian minorities, and just basic rights that you think here minorities should have were taken away in Ukraine after 2012, right? I don't want to go too much into Ukraine, but I happen to know because it is a bordering country with Hungary. So, I mean, the biggest issue for them, I believe, was the language law that you couldn't speak your own language in Ukraine, right? Or you had to change your name to have a more Ukrainian sounding stuff. So things were horrible, and I'm pretty sure it's much, much complicated, right? So, but I don't. There's also some stuff that you should not be talking about YouTube. James, I know what you're talking about. Let's just stay there. It's not like it's not like we're eating one or the other propaganda completely, right? We think for ourselves. What about grandparents? Well, I had the whole first part of this video talking about grandparents. Do you have more specific questions that I can answer? Um, if you knew ahead of time what was coming, what would you wish you had done before things got worse, even without too many resources to prepare with? Well, land would have been important, but we had some land. For us, it would have been very important to have equipment, like even if you could have had a tractor or something like that. Machinery that is working and you have spare parts for that, the value of that was very high, right? If you could use that to actually produce food, which was like compared to any other assets, it went up multiple fold. So as long as you have machinery or equipment to produce food, and you have the knowledge and you have the land and you have the safety and maybe at least family members or someone to work with that you trust, that is something that you would want to work on before a crisis. That would be probably the most important things. And also to with that you could help your neighbors and help your family and help your community. Um, so we had one relative who had that and he did very, very well. So he did much better than us too. Um, Yeah, so he did. He had equipment, right? But he was further away, so we couldn't use it. We had lands completely different, part of the country, basically. So it was, well, not the whole country, but at least different part of Transylvania, right? So it was a bit different. We did sometimes go there and help them because they had so much to do, right? And then we would get a meal and some chicken and some other stuff to take home, and that was our pay. So that would be, I think, the best thing you can have. Of course, any other like stuff that you would use on a daily basis, have extra of those. I'm specifically thinking about work boots. Um, Also, gloves were very important. Work gloves, right? Especially if you're on the field. And for us, we didn't have machinery even during that time. We couldn't acquire it. The price went up so much. However, we did want some garden hose and tools basically to work the land. That was also so expensive and so hard to get that my uncle had to make them out of other like raw materials in the sense of steel plates and other stuff. So luckily did have some machining tools and machinery stuff because my father was a machinist and my uncle was very skillful with many other things, and we had grinders and that sort of stuff. So we had to make some tools. I mean, we had some, of course, from my grandfather, but that wasn't barely enough, and you wanted some good quality ones, and it was hard to get. It was very hard to get. So that's why I said in my previous videos, like we picked potatoes like with our hands and used our hands as to move the dirt and bury the potatoes because we didn't have anything other. At least the first year, it was horrible. So all of that would be very important. I wouldn't want to go, and want to have good quality stuff, not the stuff that breaks easily or that was made for like the weekend gardeners. I don't want to make like big ads here, but Rogue is the one that I bought. They're super expensive already. Like the good stuff is so expensive already. You can buy some stuff from Home Depot or Lowe's that are still like really good, but look for the handles. Make sure the long handle. They have long handles and so many other stuff you have to watch out for. Like if you're gardening at to any degree, you'll know what I'm talking about. Um, right. Other stuff like it would have been nice to have silver, of course. We didn't have any. Think about stuff that you can trade during hyperinflation, but even extra equipment that you can trade, and you can trade enough of it that you can purchase real estate during hyperinflation. Now, I like real estate even now. It's still much better than so many other stuff because it's at least real, but compared, and it will go up during hyperinflation, but compared to many other stuff, it will actually fall. Like compared to the food price, it will fall. Like even now, I mean, during these last few months, like okay, real estate went up 30%, like historic whatever. Oh my god, 30% is going up. And then gas prices has went went up 100%. You know what I'm saying? So compared to gas prices, real estate has fallen. Compared to food price, real estate has fallen, right? So that's what I'm talking about. It might real estate might go up 100%, 200, 500% during hyperinflation, but if food price goes up thousands of times, right? During at least maybe a couple of years, then you could trade that and buy up the real estate that has increased and has hyperinflated, but that not that much. So it's more against measuring one thing against another thing. So picking up real estate would have been good, but basically, okay, what are you gonna give for that real estate? Land is gonna be different based on is that land like producing asset or non-producing asset? You'll be able. I'm thinking that, or in our case, let's just say I'm not making speculation. In our case, non-producing land was very cheap. However, producing land was super expensive. So yeah, so I hope I answered some speculative questions as well. Tools to repair stuff. That was very important. Like I keep telling this, like door hinges, things broke down, and you won't be able to import anything during these cases, and you'll have to fix it. So having the skill to fix it, having the equipment to just like from lathes to other many stuff, if you have all of that, then you can actually work with it. It might become very important one day. So tools to fix stuff, whether that's cars or other stuff, that's very important as well. All right. Yeah, spare tools and machinery. So to like for instance, in the case of a car, it would ideally well and expand this to guns as well, by the way. What you would want to have in our case, two of the exact same cars, exactly the same. Whether it's a good car, bad car, it doesn't really matter. You would want to have two. Basically, you would only use one because of gas prices were so high anyway, but the other car you could actually take apart and use for spare parts, right? So as long as you have multiple of the same and things are interchangeable, so you would always have one at least that you can use. So you know, expand that to any field that you want. But that was a very, very common thing that people would want to have. Um, the same. So let's say if I have one type of car or other, I would trade that for you because then it would be the exact same model truck that I already have, right? And that would be much more valuable because now because spare parts are gone, like that's it, no more. Um, I mean, now with modern stuff, like if you can actually fabricate stuff with 3D printing, right? And in our case, we did hand carved molds, right? And then we would pour aluminum and do it that way. But it's just like super hard. Now you can just 3D print the mold, produce it. It's like all of that stuff was very, very important. Ideally, like you want to also have it now in the good times as a hobby, right? So you don't just like invest and then it stays and you're hoping for hyperinflation. You want to stick with the stuff you know. But if you know this, you know how to do it, then that's something good. Let me read some more comments. Yeah, we're gonna stay here for another 20 minutes, and after that, will stay goodbyes. So it looks like you guys are having a conversation. That's good. Um, all right, favorite tools. My favorite tools. I mean, I'm I'm an electric engineer and computer science. So for my stuff, I ordered a bunch of open source hardware that I can program. Right, even if it's like something goes down, I still want to be able to do a security system. Right, build that having wires, having the sensors and all of that. So I have some of that, but also if you want like build like now it's not like the 80s or 90s. You still want to use what you have, right? So if you have open source hardware that you can actually work with, you program, I mean, you can make you can sell stuff, right? You can do motion detector security systems, or you can put that together. Security systems you can imagine would go up in price. Now that's sort of like hard, but as long as you can fix stuff, that's also good. But also like timing the watering, right? So how do you water the plants? So timing stuff. Also automatic chicken coop doors. Like that's one thing that I'm experimenting with. Right? You can buy it now, so don't get me wrong. Like if you're not into this, you don't have to be worried. You can just buy it. But I'm saying all of that stuff might be more important later on when you have this whole full clientele. But I'm not being specific. I'm only gonna do chicken coop doors. So I'm buying the open source hardware like Arduinos and all of that stuff that I can put other peripherals and do and basically do robot hands or whatever I want to do with them. So for me, that's exciting and that's fun. But that's also kind of like high tech, and if you cannot import solder or something like that, then you'll be out of luck. It's same thing with 3D printing. If you cannot do the filament or whatever the other stuff, like you have to pack. If you have a hobby, and this goes on for everything, if you have a hobby, make sure you have spare stuff now, okay? Because prices probably have went up. And also try to pick a hobby that could be useful. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's some really nice beautiful hobbies out there, but maybe something that translates into the real world. Yeah, and other stuff, but also some very basic tools is needed. So make sure you have your drills and your impact drivers and all of that stuff. Also have a spare batteries for everything. Like, okay, you have Makita tools, good. Buy a bunch of Makita batteries. Not just that, have a solar array that you can charge your batteries, because guess what? Blackouts and brownouts, right? Um, okay. Let's see some other stuff. Yeah, I'm glad you guys are having a conversation. If you have a question, just do at Science Start Path Academy or three question marks or something like that, so I can pick it up immediately. All right. StarPath Academy. Consider a microscope to be able to solder and repair surface mount PCB. Yes, yes. So I have my setup, right? And we have microscopes and all other stuff as well. Actually, my wife has that. So, but yeah, exactly. So it plays into the hand. Like, okay, what happens if can I turn this hobby, or can I turn this work that I'm doing right now for a company, if that stops, how can I use my knowledge and skills to serve others and be helpful during these economic downturns and get paid for it, maybe in food, maybe in something else, right? And what would I need in those times? What are the stuff that you have to constantly buy? like every couple of months, every year, every something like that. What happens if you cannot get those for the next 4 years? Okay, so you have to think about that. So buying silver and buying ammo is fine, but you also will need to do stuff, right? Well, maybe ammo is sort of midway there. Most sought after profession during crisis. Hmm. It's a bit hard to tell because it's not like profession. Like there were, I would say, family of professions. So thank you for the question, Philip. Um, I would say, let's say what's not important. So stuff that doesn't translate into the real world. So think about like a bunch of paper pushing, right? I mean, now let's stay in the modern world, web design or something like that. If you're a web designer, don't get mad, right? But like most likely, if somebody is starving, they won't care too much about web design, right? But if you can make soap out of lard and you can butcher a pig, uh, you can sell that, right? Now, I do believe that this crash will be a bit different than the last crashes because government in this case is growing, and we'll get back to the question before I forget it. But so my guess is that some professions that will be core in government will be still there because looks like we're not going into that sudden collapse. If we are, then it will be planned. But I'm thinking if your job is, let's say, in a field where there's robotics and machinery and it's a government job, so basically army and that sort of stuff. I'm thinking you'll be, that has some job security, right? However, if you are, so people who love government a lot tend to also work in government but also not do essential jobs, in the sense like truly essential, in the sense like Maduro wouldn't care about it. if if a dictator comes, he wouldn't necessarily care about it. So technically those jobs, even though no matter how much you love government and you work for government, will be cut immediately, and only the very essentials will be kept, and those will be kept very close, don't get me wrong. So army stuff and security detail for the dictator, right? So all of that stuff will be there. But if you're a government bureaucrat, low level, mid level bureaucrat, it doesn't matter how much you love government, you'll be out of a job, no question about it. In these cases, because right now you have, it's almost like politically incentivized to keep you there because the current structure is your job stability, so they're keeping you there like a flower in a pot. Of course I'm thinking you're doing a good job. I'm saying like there's another incentive to keep you there because you are now invested in the system, and the system needs to be kept up, and you will fight your neighbors and your family to keep the current system up because that gives your job security. So that is like a symbiotic relationship. But once the government has failed, like in our case in Romania, that symbiotic relationship is no longer there because they don't need you anymore. They either have, like, it went to all like a sudden dictatorship, like in case of many countries in South America, or it will become more of like a complete libertarian state, like it was short for a short brief period in Romania, that nobody cares for anything and they just do, and all the laws are broken, and they people just do a little anarchy here and there and still manage to survive somehow, right? So like in the sense of nobody was paying taxes, nobody cared if you would have a ticket violation or parking violation or something like that. So that's what I'm saying, right? And then none of these cases, none of these edge cases really need your job. That's what I'm saying. So okay, so back to professions. usually fixing up stuff that are essential for life, security, shelter, and all those stuff. So think about like, but I cannot like give too by big generalizations. Like, okay, fixing up houses is really good, but not for the non-essential stuff. Like there were so many broken down doors, there were so many broken down like walls. They looked horrible. The outside of the house looked horrible. Nobody cared. Nobody painted. Nobody had the money or the capital to do any upgrades or kitchen stuff. Like all that's all fine and dandy if you're flipping houses now, but if you're surviving, the only thing you care about is the roof is leaking, if the plumbing is working, and you have some basic electricity. Like, is it like the last plug in the outlet, I guess, in the wall is working? You didn't care about the rooms you shut off, and you actually sealed the door anyway, so you don't have to heat it, right? That's what I'm saying. Like, things are broken down, and you're falling back to the very essential stuff. Car stuff was also good. However, you have to watch out because with nowadays, to be honest, like with the cars, there's so small tolerance that it's like nobody can fix it anymore. You have to send it back, right? And then they replace the whole thing, or somebody like very professional replaces. So that was good in our case, but I don't know if I would be able to touch the latest 2022 Volvo and actually do something with it. But if you give me like an old Ford or something like that, yeah, I can probably have some spare parts and fix it. So, but like, what happens first? Do they go fully green, and the price of gasoline will be like $1,000 a barrel, and those will be useless, or will it be still okay? So, like, just because it had historical good options, that might not always be true. So I'm thinking like, yes, it will, but I'm giving you like a bigger context for an answer, so you can make up your own answers, hopefully with some of the information or knowledge. um so fixing stuff up that was necessary for life. So, and that gives you broad um, a broad perspective, I guess. And he does say security, babysitting, teaching, farming, other types of management. So babysitting was really not there because families moved in together. That's what happened. And you would have an aunt, you would have a cousin, somebody who would take care of the kids, and everyone else was out working, right? In our case, I mean, I had younger cousins later on, so it was always the same, that people would move in together and somebody would take. You wouldn't have the money to pay babysitting or anything like that. May that be changed? I don't know. There was also some neighbors and others kids getting together, and then one parent could be so basically improvised babysitting. um, it wasn't like, okay, a teenager comes over and you pay them for something. I can maybe that was also in our culture, so I don't know how it would play out in the United States, in Western Europe, but I'm thinking that would still be true. Yeah, teaching, not really. I mean, people at some point stopped going to school and they closed down. And eventually, to get them back into school, they had to pay the families, right? I told you about that, especially university and that stuff. You had a UBI for families who had kids and they went back into school, and then they would pay the parents as long as um, the kids went to school and they were all there all of the time with the presents and everything, so they would get checks from schools. Thank you for attending. That was like bringing it back from hyperinflation, because kids helped on the farms, like young people, everybody had to help on the farm because food was much more important. It was more like a homeschooling type of environment. Okay, all the job on the field is done, and okay, we sit down and we do some arithmetics or math with my dad or something like that. So That was sort of short lived. Eventually, we didn't have like a full on Mad Max scenario in Romania. So schools were not like completely closed, but they had to implement some tricks in order to get people back into the old you know wagon track or something like that. Um, yeah, so farming was very important, but you have to have some equipment and some other stuff we talked about. Security was, I imagine it will be much, much important now in the current climate than it was for us. In our case, there was a lot of huge social cohesion, and everybody was happy that they got rid of communism, and it was a bit different. Like we had, I won't get into some crimes or anything like that in this live. However, there will, even then it had some importance, but I believe in the current climate it will be 100-fold more important. I just stay there. Okay. Geez, somebody's spamming me. Okay. Let's see. All right. Yeah, definitely do some solar setup. I'm not here to make recommendations, but it sometimes doesn't make sense with the current prices to, especially if you're living in certain areas of the country, to have a fully set up solar array to be completely independent. If you don't have the money, of course, if you have the money, that's perfect. So for those people, I would at least say that there are, and I have posted this in the video description. And I can do it again. But basically, these couple of panels with a setup that are used for RVs, right, and boats and other stuff. So at least if you have a fully blackout, right, for a couple of days or even a week, you will still want to have your fridge and freezer running. So that's the most important. Of course, you can have a generator. You have to have a generator and all of that stuff, but making sure that you have at least that solar array with the battery and inverter, everything all together. And in my case, it would be very important that it's also portable. So I would definitely want to have that. Um, but if you're going for the full setup and know that you will be living there even after something happens, then I mean everything depends on your own personal strategy. But I'm saying solar and even wind energy, whatever you can do. I have been looking into wind energy, and it looks like complementing each other and would be okay. Great. Okay. Ahmed says so Ahmed's wife says because skills. My husband has skills and people are clueless. Husband to the rescue. I talk him. I talk him in the door. He fixes their life. He also has tools, not enough, but could trade if SHTF. Yeah, definitely skills. I have been saying this again and again that having skills that you can barter is very important. Many people ask about barter, but actually the biggest thing that we bartered was our skills. Like, okay, I can come to you and fix this for you, right? And then you can either pay me in food, pay me in kids' clothes, or whatever you can pay me in, and then we have an arrangement. Or you come back, and next time my roof is leaking, or whatever is done, then you're the guy who's going to take care of my stuff, right? So it had to have that underlying layer of trust. And that's what we did. In some cases, of course, you can do some gypsy bank, what they called it, right? We don't want to get into that, but yeah. basically there's a group of people, everyone having a different set of skills. We also put money in the pool, and then you can use some portion of that money to pay the other person that has the skill. So it's like sort of like an insurance mixed together with a bunch of people who have skills. But you really have to have like your with your cousins or someone else like you really trust, or a group of friends. This would not work out with random people or something like that. Yeah, my father-in-law fixed cars, right? And he did well, and he would sometimes be paid for a day's work with 2 sacks of potatoes, he said. So just know that the price of food and the price of basic necessities will be so high that basically you can trade that. Okay. Star Path Academy. So, Edge Brand Agency ask, what would you invest $1,000 if you had already had the basics covered? So, I'm not giving investment advice, right? That's the first thing. But I really need more context. Like basics covering is fine, but rather investing the USD in the stock market, right? Which completely collapsed in Romania, and everything went bankrupt. Or putting it, let's say, in silver, or putting it in ammo, or putting it in gold or something like that. That also, in my opinion, could be good in, or would have been good, not making future promises, would have been good in our case. I would rather use it to build my capabilities to help other people during crisis, or produce stuff that I can barter away, right? So let's just say one simple thing, right? If you're really, and I keep bringing 3D printing up, but you could be anything. So you could either buy $1,000 worth of silver and barter that away. First of all, it could be dangerous to barter silver away when everybody knows, like, okay, this guy has silver, right? So we'll talk about that later. Like, it's still good, but you have to watch out what you do. And I can probably give some tips maybe before at the end of this video. One tip. Okay, so you could do that, right? And you have a fixed amount of stuff barter away. So okay, this 10 folds, 100 folds, and food prices 50 fold, whatever. So you could do that. However, what if you would invest that into 3D printing, or a garden, or something like that, where you can produce something so essential during um, during the midst of the crisis, that you can have something to trade away forever. Instead of like having $1,000 worth of silver, you trade that away, but after that it's gone, right? And what if silver, you didn't get the peak of it, like hyperinflation lasts for another 4 years, and you trade it away? Like, okay, no problem. I mean, you still got a good deal. But what if you invest that into your business or hobby or whatever, and then you can produce some stuff that people will need, that is essential, that you can produce the widget or thing for the next 7 years, because now you have that. So for me, that might be actually a better investment, because I still have the initial investment, plus I'm producing stuff. So, but that has to be so custom for you that I cannot answer the question. But think about those terms. Like, if you cannot do that, then yes, there are many things that you can do with it, including precious metals and ammo and all of that stuff. But you really have to think about how you're gonna how you're gonna trade it away, right? Basically. Yeah, I mean, I think that answered the questions, your question. Feel free to have more specific, or give another question that around this topic if you want to be more specific. and maybe I can give a better answer. What are your thoughts on energy storage solutions? Right. I mean, we keep saying solar and all of that stuff, but like you have to think about the battery life, and that you don't want like okay, so if you have lead acid batteries or something like that, or deep cycle, whatever, but you really have to think about the lifetime of that and what happens if you cannot replace it. Do you have spares and all of that stuff? Or don't completely rely on it, because right now we take it for granted that you can go on Amazon and you can purchase a new cable. What happens if you cannot do that? Okay, do you have the skill to create a cable? Do you have the skill to fix some of that stuff? If not, then buy spare of everything, right? So that's one thing. But of course, energy storage. I mean, the best is, to be honest, like carbon stuff. I mean, it's I mean, wood. You can chop wood, right? Can't you? So, or oil, or even used cooking oil or that stuff, right? So, carbon-based stuff, because it was nature's way of storing energy. I mean, your fat cells is carbon and hydrogen, right? So it's storing energy. So as long as you can go with nature's way, it's easy to store it. You can store it indefinitely, right? So I'm not saying like pollutions, whatever. Maybe it's not like as a society we want to do better, but like I'm answering your question now. So yeah, the closer you can get to nature's way of storing something, the easier it will be. If not, you have to go ultra high tech, but you have to make sure that that the whole apparatus you have, you can fix it up, you can support it, and you have replacement parts, and you have the knowledge, which is also fine. But you have to think about all of those stuff. Like if somebody is storing just diesel, and they have something that they can generate with that, he's gonna have a much easier time than maybe someone who's doing very high tech storage after 7 years, right? Maybe, well, I don't know how you can store diesel for that long, but whatever. If you have, let's just say, if you have a forest that you can cut the trees, yeah, it's much better for long term. Of course, if you live somewhere where you can do, you can generate energy from water flow, that's even better. Yeah, be more specific, then I can give my opinion. But that's the high 30,000 foot view of it. But basically, you want to have both, right? It's very hard unless you know how to build a generator from, I believe it's wood gas. Correct me if I'm wrong, but basically, you can burn wood, then burn the wood gas, basically, and then run a turbine with that. I've looked into that. I'm not building one, but that's pretty amazing. Denmark bear. Denmark bear. One third of all employees in Denmark work in the public sector. Well, isn't that wonderful? I mean, the life in Denmark is probably not bad during normal situations, but imagine if a government would collapse. What would happen with that? It's absolutely horrible. And that's pretty bad, like all across Europe. And it was really bad in Romania. It's just waiting waiting there to have like something bad happen. Who thought that would be a good idea? Unless like the government is producing something, like do you have government owned oil fields? Then it's fine, I guess. Like in Russia or something. I'm pretty sure Denmark doesn't. Beautiful country, at least from the pictures. I would love to visit it, by the way. Yeah. Hey, my parents and grandparents went through hyperinflation as well. None of them talk about it. All I was told when paying with 10,000 zloty bills is that, or that 100,000 zloty bills, that is the old money, and now we use the new money. Yes, yeah. I mean, I like to talk about it because I had fun during those times. Because I was young and that was life for me. I didn't care. Like, it's life. Okay, we eat today, we don't eat today, or whatever. I mean, that's it. Like, we never really went fully, um, like starving. But like for me as a young person, I mean, your youth is enjoyable. So, like, you have so much energy, you're out in the field, you're climbing on trees, you're doing a bunch of fun stuff. So, I have many fond memories, right? That's why I like talking about it in the sense, like sharing information about it. And all of these other stuff that I share is just like memories that I have that are also like together with some fond memories. But definitely, I told this before, that it was very hard for the older generation. Like the your parents would be very hard because they have to think about how they take care of you, right? Going through it now, it would be very hard for me. But then it was okay. So I like I can bring up the memories much easier. But it is kind of sad that they don't pass it down. Luckily, I had a really good grandmother who passed a lot of knowledge down before, during, and after, because she went through the World War, communism, hyperinflation. Basically, she went through like three hyperinflations, and then even afterwards, we had her and we talked, and I've loved to talk with her, and I spent tremendous amount of time with my grandmother, and I wanted to learn, like, okay, $10,000 bills or Romanian dollar bills. Like, okay, what is this? Why do we have that? What did you do with your old bills? Right? What happened with that? Then I found my aunt's stash of 10,000 Romanian lei bills, which was, I mean, it was a huge stash, by the way. Went to nothing, absolutely nothing. Okay, why did it go to nothing? So all of that plus studying the economy and macroeconomics a little bit. It was just fun for me. But yeah, ask them more. Like, ask them for practical stuff. Um, I only even now I only have a few people in Romania who are willing to talk about it, and I try to have someone on to at least talk in Romanian or in Hungarian, and then we would translate it afterwards. But they don't want to talk about it. They want to forget it. So if you have any questions for me, then let me know. Okay, do you have any more questions? Um, yeah, yeah. Tag me or something because I like the conversation. It's very flowing, but I don't want to break it up. So if you have any questions for me, then just type question or a Q. Yeah, like Philip does. Q and then the question. How important was sugar or honey? It was very important. Very, very important. Luckily, we had sugar a lot, and we even had some honey. We even treated a bunch of illnesses with honey, and you can treat wounds with honey if you know what you're doing. I don't think we had to do that. Maybe my father did. He worked a lot and got injured many times. However, sugar was actually important to keep morale up and produce brandy and some other stuff like homemade brandy. But also to keep morale up, you need to have good grandmothers or someone who can cook. And like a lot of the sweets or whatever you're having now or are used to have now, we had none of that, of course. No chocolate. When first time I ate chocolate, it was like a bar of chocolate, and all of us got together during a day, like around the table, and we split it up to like small pieces, and everyone got one, and that was chocolate for us. Of course, we then later on we had some materials, basically like cocoa and some sugar and some other stuff, powdered milk and whatever, and we made homemade chocolate. So that's we had that at some point, but not having sweets, especially if you're used to, is gonna be very hard and will feed into your depression. Let's face it, like a lot of people will have a very hard time accommodating into hard times, and sugar and baking sweets and fruits was very important. Like if you could have a peach tree and some flour and some sugar, you're gonna be okay. I mean, if you can make pies or you can do many other stuff with sugar, it was very important. We was so important sugar that because it was one of our techniques to store wealth. Okay, so we had a sugar factory in our hometown, very close to our hometown, and my father and I went there. And before, like it was still functioning during that time. It was already hyperinflation, even during and after hyperinflation. Eventually it stopped, it got sold to the Germans, who like got into the place, and then I don't know what they built instead of it. But anyway, we went there and packed up and bought as much sugar as we can, because white crystallized sugar is super easy to store. Look it up, but it's super easy to store. Not the molasses, not the healthier brown sugar and all of that stuff, but the actual white crystallized sugar is super easy to store. And we knew we could always sell it, right? So instead of holding cash, we would pack that, and we would have so much that I still believe we still have some. I think we just kept it in order to like have a memory. But back in Romania, I'm pretty sure we still have some sugar from that era. I don't know, like not much, but maybe I should take a photo of what and then show it to you guys, like whatever. So anyway, we use that to store wealth, basically. We used aluminum scraps and all of that stuff. Everything was better than cash, right? That's why we eventually came on top of hyperinflation and profited to some degree and came out positive the other end. But anyway, so sugar was very important, but you have to know what you do with it, how you sell it. Is it for you or who is it for? And it was also important to make homemade brandy and some other stuff that you could trade and was a very good barterable item. We didn't do that much, but it was pretty important. Honey is again very easily storable, absolutely super easy to store. Now, I think you have to get honey from like the actual um the people who who have bees instead of store-bought honey. I don't know if store-bought honey would hold up that long, but it's almost indefinitely you can store honey, and it is again very very important to have, and much healthier, and it has some other nutritional benefits instead of just empty sugars, I guess. But look it up. You can treat wounds and some other stuff. Manuka honey, somebody mentioned it here in the chat. I lost, but yeah, that's also it was very important for like treating from sore throats to many other stuff. Very good question, by the way. Yeah, if you have like specific question, okay, what should I do with how many pounds of honey or sugar? Then I can give you some other tips. Okay, so James comes back to the question, how can we safely use precious metals in hyperinflation? So I did promise you like a tip, right? Um, what you have to watch out for. So I'm gonna give you like a bad example and then what we did, and then you have to make up your own good example for the future. One bad example would be to flaunt it, right? You go in and you say, okay, who's gonna give me as much as possible for this the silver coin or something like that. Even worse if you do like a whole tube or something like that, and then they know you have more, right? That's super crazy to do that. Or it's somewhat better if you bring it into like your shop, then trade it immediately for just the right amount of cash that you're going to use today, and then use the cash and then go back again. We had exchange houses, or kind of people who acted as exchange houses, where you could bring your gold, exchange it better for foreign currency because our currency was hyperinflating. But if you had to have local currency, you just would use the right amount for today or for tomorrow, and then you would use that, right, and keep the rest still in the precious metals. Now, we didn't have a lot of precious metals, but here's another trick, was to have sort of safety. You had to play that this is your last stuff, like this is my the only thing I have, right? So in order to do that, one strategy was that you would, instead of having coins or bars, you would make wedding bands out of it, right? So technically, in a situation that I can bring up in memory, it would be much, much better if you would have 10 last wedding rings that you would trade, right? Because you can go on your finger and you could go in there and say, oh man, this is the last thing. I really don't have anything else. And you say, okay, how much can I get for that? And you exactly know the price. You're not going to be fooled, whatever. And you can say, oh, I already asked someone, like, can you give me at least this much or whatever? So don't get fooled, but that's it. Like, you're selling your last ring, and you can do that 10 times over, 20 times over, right? As long as you have that. Now, what's the deal with that is, like, you don't want to buy jewelry now for that, because there's a high markup and high cost of fabrication on it. Like, you don't want to pay for that. No, you have to have a wife who's a jeweler, right? And then they will turn the granules that you buy off of kitco.com or something like that into jewelry that are like your savings, right? So you can use that. So you have to have some like that. And I was thinking about having that as a service, that were okay, do you want do wedding bands for savings? Then we can think about, like, okay, what's the exact cost of the gold, and there's a very small markup, and just here you go, you can buy it. But I'm not into selling and buying stuff. So think about that stuff, right? It's much easier, and you can go there even on the market where you're going to buy a motorcycle or something. You can take it there, but you don't want a roll of silver coins there, because, okay, where do you have it? How do you have it? Eventually it will be easier if something happens, like it will become the de facto currency, like so many people are doing it later on, that you they cannot just assume like you have a huge stash. By the way, don't have a huge stash, not where you live, not in the country. um you don't need it. There's so many other stuff that you should barter instead of silver or gold. I just whatever. Well, you have to. I mean, my case is different because I have multiple citizenships. But think about like having it at least in different jurisdiction that where you are. I mean, I don't give advice. This is just something to think about. So think about that stuff, like how you're gonna use it. Right now, I think the coin shops or whatever could become those types of exchange houses. And somebody told in a comment section in my last live that when there was the Hunt brother incident where they cornered the silver market, which they didn't, but they now in history that's what it's written. Um, it's what they had was two lines for coin shops. First, in the morning, there's a huge line that went in, that everybody who wanted to sell their stuff went in there, they're sold. And then in the afternoon or later that day, there was another line for the purchasers, and then they would buy the silver that was brought into the shop. So as long as you can do that, that's much safer. Even though what you exchange it for usually is cash, and cash will be immediately from the second you bought it, it will be depreciating. So you really have to know what you're doing, why you're doing it. Okay, you get a bunch of cash. What do you do with it? Bring it to the guy with the tractor to buy his tractor or buy his equipment immediately. if you're a tight knit community or you're Amish or whatever, and everybody has the same assets and same stuff, then you can probably barter away as long as, or if it's your cousin or something like that. But even with cash, even when we are exchanging cash, like the Deutschmark to Romanian lei, uh, you have to go somewhere where you trust the place, because there will be new and new places popping up, because now it will become a lucrative business to change money, right? The money changers of old, now they're bankers. There will be the money changers of new age or whatever. So what will happen is that a lot of scams will happen around those places. Absolutely a lot. Like one time, I think we were exchanging some Hungarian forint to Romanian lei. Both were hyperinflating, but Romanian lei was hyperinflating a bit later. So, like there were so many tricks on the books that you would count it, they would give it back. Let me put the rubber band on it for you, right? And they immediately swap the whole stack of cash, right? And you wouldn't see it. And here you go, right? And luckily, my mom checked it again, because it was she was super like paranoid about money. Like she knew everything, man, and she's the fastest counter. She could count it so fast. She worked as a waitress in her younger age, and there were a huge stack of bills to buy food, right? Because hyperinflation. So so she checked. She always checks. She double checked everything. She triple counted everything, and we caught them, of course. And here you go. Here's your money back. We threw it back. Give my stuff back, and woof, we went away. And of course, we could have got robbed. Luckily, it was like my father was there, my uncle was there, my cousin was there, I was there, my mom was there. So it was like a transaction, right? So, and they were completely legal, nothing bad. It's just people will, well, if once something is a lucrative business, or there's power or money in it, it will attract the flies. Like SHIT will attract the flies, and you will have so many bad actors that you really have to watch out what you're doing. So that's why I'm like, I don't want to go through that anymore. I'm not planning to barter silver. I would rather barter bullets, right? But yeah, I mean, it's your plan. So that's some story and a tip or whatever. James Hafford says, "Why wouldn't you just exchange the gold for the tractor?" Okay, who owns the tractor? Do you know the person? Is it your cousin? Is it not? Okay, so they can just they can just follow you where you're taking the tractor, and they will know. Well, you had one coin, you'll have another somewhere, right? And yeah, it's. I mean, you can, but you have to know your environment where you are doing the exchange. Is it safe? Who are you exchanging it with? Because if like half an ounce of gold coin buys you a tractor, that's a lot of concentrated value. Okay, um, you really have to have your, like, how many people with AR-15s you're going to go to trade that piece of gold for the tractor to show them that it's really not worth for them to follow you back. So like think of logical stuff, and let's say what's the movie The Walking Dead, where like total collapse and afterwards people are trading. Okay, how are you going to trade? A good question, by the way. You can is just I would rather have the tractor now instead of the tractor being super expensive. The tractor might go up more than the gold, because it also has some usability. So you want to pre-position, by the way. That's what I'm saying. Like, okay, you know you're gonna need the tractor. You have the money now. Maybe it's better to have the tractor now. Maybe it's not, right? Maybe you're betting on gold. But you want to pre-position of this for the stuff that's coming. The best advice, though, is to know whether weapon you have very well knowing the pros and cons, the best way to use regular training. Yeah. So it's basically the skills. Okay, James does agree with me. He has a good point. I'm saying if you're like living in an Amish community and you know everyone and then you know where they live, you know their cousin, you know it's totally fine to trade with silver and gold, no problem. Like, okay, I'm gonna work on your field and I'm gonna get a coin afterwards, or I'm gonna trade my tractor, no problem. It wasn't really a problem for us because I have 10 cousins and we had like for my father's cousins, and it was a community that we usually traded with. And sometimes, of course, we went to the market and sell potatoes and some other stuff. We would deal with in cash, and then immediately with that cash, we would do something. um so I mean that has been the case. Like I tried to have someone on from South America, from who again went through um hyperinflation, and I couldn't get him. But in his memo he did say that's what they did as well. They just traded everything to trash cash and immediately get, like, it was like hot potato. But it was safer because I don't want to use derogatory terms, but all the other people were doing it and they would think you're one of them. I don't know how else to put it. Like, okay, like maybe if we would have a one-on-one conversation, I could be more open, but we're on YouTube. Blend in. Yeah, blend in. We'll watch the live stream later. All right, no problem. Which country is the safest in Eastern Europe to live during the bad times? I would say Switzerland. As long as you have everything set up and you're up in the mountains, it's always better in the mountains. It's always better in the mountains during these times. You have the advantage of knowing your terrain. You're up, you know where the stuff is, and that's why mountainous people are hard to deal with and hard to take over. So yeah, the mountains are good. And think about it like this: there will be people who want to take stuff, and the only way how you can convince them that they don't want to take is that it costs more to take than what they can gain. And that's true. That's basic game theory, right? So the only way to do that is to live in such a harsh environment, and you accommodating to a harsh environment is that even if they take the stuff, what are they going to do? Work and live in this harsh environment? There's nothing to take, right? What you have is your skills and working on the harsh environment, and you enjoy it. And they won't enjoy it, believe me. So as long as you have that, and you even defend it, right, actively defend it, it's not worthwhile for them to take anything, because what are they going to gain? Just this year's crop, right? Even the land, they what are they going to do? Like, are they going to come and live in the harsh environment and deal with what you have to deal? So that's the whole mechanism here. You have to make it so hard for yourself that there's nothing to take. So yeah, embrace the cold, I guess. But you really have to be accommodated to that, and of course, um, it's not just that, because I mean the whole country or your whole community has to be like that, and it's very hard to find that in the United States. So in the United States, I'm not saying it's the mountainous regions that are going to be super fine, but those who live there and live there for multiple generations will be doing fine, believe me. If you move there now, it might be harder, but if you would be in Switzerland and you have your stash and you have your everything, it would be most likely easier. If not, go to Romania and to the Carpathians, but Romania has some other bad issues. Hungary, Poland would be okay. Yeah, probably Czechia, Slovakia, one of those countries. I guess Czech Republic. Yeah, I mean American. That's my opinion. I'm open. Northern part of it too. The issue is, well, of course, government. Like, if there's too much infiltrators in the government and they are not willing to protect their own people, no matter how good the environment is, it's better just to be in a different place. All right. Well, that went on for a long time. You guys are still here. Do you still want to have a couple more questions? If not, I think we'll just leave it here. All right. Yeah, good conversation. I will actually probably rewatch the stream as well and read some of your stuff. Oh, there is a question. Michael Smith, is gold only good for preserving wealth into the next system, as people will hold their physical assets, or what could be bought with gold in a practical sense? I mean, that's what I'm planning for. Like, I don't want to deal with the dangers in the United States in dealing with metals. So I would rather have all my metals outside. But for you, might be a totally different scenario. Because our own example was that when we sold the farm, the homestead that my aunt lived on, and she passed away, which was my grandmother's sister, so great aunt, I guess. We there was many people who wanted it, in the sense of, from the family, they all wanted their share cut. Nobody could say like, okay, well, I'll pay you and I get to keep it, or let's just work on the land, don't be stupid or sell it, whatever. In fights in the family, best thing to do, sell it in hyperinflation, right? So I told the story of the same amount of cash that we got for that farm, which is around 2 million something, which to me, yeah, 2 million Romanian lei. The same would have bought us the same year. I believe we calculated 15 grams of gold, right? And eventually we did buy the gold, and even have the necklace that we bought later on that year. My part of the family, my father, my mother, and that part. However, the amount that got eventually split. So that's what I'm saying. Like, during that time, somebody made a really good deal. We didn't exchange the property directly for the gold. We exchanged it for hyperinflating currency. We divided it, and then everybody did what they wanted with the currency. We put some more to it, and we bought gold with it. And I still have it, and now it's a memorabilia for me. And remember my mom crying over it, and it was like horrible times during those times. But anyway, so what I want to say, like, if you would have been on the other end of that trade, you could have bought that property. Now that property is worth, I have to double check my buy me a coffee account. We did some calculation there. So I double checked, okay, the property, I know exactly where it is. I measured it on Google Map. I did some estimations. I have to double check what it was, but let's just go with like 120,000 euros or something like that. So I think it was more, but let's just whatever the number. So think about that trade: 15 grams of gold, and current value probably more, maybe 200,000, right? So, so as long as you make that trade in the right time and wait 7 years and make the right time again, that's the wealth cycle that Mike Maloney is talking about, right? Right there. So technically, you could have the 15 grams of gold now for I don't know how much money, then wait it out, sell it in the right time, then grab property with it, whatever. You can grab whatever you want. I'm just saying, make it physical something, because not paper asset that you don't know if you it's going to be there in 2 years. But as long as it's another physical asset, whatever, you can make the trade, and you wait for another 7 years. And how many folded you money? I think you probably like 10,000 folded your money or something more than that. So there are trades like this if you want to make them. It's just you have to know who are you dealing with, how are you dealing with, and why are you doing it, right? So I'm planning to, I mean, I'm not planning anything. I mean, I am, but it's not a YouTube thing. So the answer to your question is no. It can be used many, many, many ways, but you want to watch out what you do with it and how and who you deal with. Right. So many, many practical things that you can do with. What you want to do is make a sensible trade. And in order to do that, the very important thing that you have to think about is that you don't get into such a bad situation that you have to sell in the wrong time, or you get desperate and you have to sell in the wrong time, or you get too desperate and even if it's selling in the wrong time, you sell it to the wrong people, right? So you want to pick and choose the location, the date, the time, and everything else. And for that, you have to have your basic security of food, your shelter, right? Guns and ammo, and say the rest. Community water. Okay. Right. I think that's it. I think that's it for now. Another question. Nope. What is worth buying in gold, Michael? Question: What is worth buying in gold during hyperinflation that would be worthwhile then and not be taken by the government or other people? Right. That's a good question because you have to know what the government or the trajectory of the government where it's going. And to be honest, the trajectory of current governments all across many states and countries is very different than what it was during the 90s, right? When communism fell and people were getting liberated and free trade was coming in. It was totally a different scenario. Um, in order to compare the current situation, unfortunately, we would almost have to go back to prior World War One, where we had a hyperinflation during the two world wars in Hungary. I know a lot about it. I had talked with my grandparents with it. Still had like 1 billion, 1B with a billion pengu, which is the currency. So it was like 1 billion. It had even 100 billion pengu. The super hyperinflated currency to this time. I think the most is the Hungarian pengu. Anyway, so that was hyperinflation. However, the gold went up. But if you would have made the trade of gold then into property and you would have bought a bunch of property, well, guess what happened? Like after the Second World War, communism came and it would have been taken away from you, right? In fact, I have a story that I share where I compare my grandfather's story during that time, who purchased land, right, and purchased heavy equipment and machinery to work on the land and employed people during that time, and a butcher's story who knew or at least sensed the political shift that was happening. And he actually, instead of purchasing more land and trying to be a good citizen and trying to make value, he kind of figured out what would be happening and sold his business, everything. Even then, during hyperinflation and during that time, he still bought gold, even though it was super expensive, right? Well, not as long as you sell something else other than cash, right? Maybe if you sold food, compared to food, gold wasn't super expensive, but he sold it, converted everything into gold, and fled the country. Well, guess what happened? Everything from our side of the family was taken. Eventually, people got declared of kulaks or whatever, and they got imprisoned. Imprisoned, absolutely. So if you didn't toe the line and you even dared to say anything about it, you would get imprisoned. And political prisoners were taken, land was taken, all of that was taken. However, the butcher, and you guys stayed here for more than 1.5 hours, so you deserve the story. The butcher went out from Romania, went all the way to Austria. He basically fled the country. And then eventually they came back. And the story it goes that they couldn't have fled the country with all the gold. It would have been it would have been very hard to do and too risky. So the gold was actually buried in Romania, and they came back 3 generations later, right? And I talked with the third generation, actually fourth generation now, roughly my age, and they, guess what, sold the gold, uh, I think 20 years ago now, 15 years ago, and restarted the butchery business and rebought some of the same places that they had then. And now they're one of the finest butchers, and they have operations going, I believe, in 4 other countries, not just Romania. Well, guess what happened with my inheritance? The communists took it away, and but I get to share the story, right? So why am I complaining? So, so anyway, like, just because it makes financial sense, it doesn't mean that it makes political sense. You have to watch out. Like, so now you start understanding, why do I have gold in the United States, right? Um, so properties you gotta watch out for in I'm guessing, like, when there's in the news that property is being in Germany, in Berlin, um, I believe if you now let's just say, if you have property over $8,000, I mean that's a company, right? Then the Berlin local government has the right to purchase it from you forcefully. Basically, they can take over in order to provide housing, government housing for the same people, I guess. So, I mean, when these things are being brought in, now I guess you have some feelings against people who own that much property, and not saying that they're not justified one way or another. I'm saying that the tune, the melody of, we can forcefully take property away from you because we know it better. If that is a trend, eventually they'll get to your grandfather. Eventually, you don't have to have that much land, and it will be still taken away if current trends continue. I mean, they want you to own nothing, right? And be happy. So, very good question. So in that case, it's still gold, but you have to be outside of the country, or at least the gold needs to be outside of the country. You have to flee from the country, and you have to wait. You have to wait, and you might never enjoy the fruits of your labor. So that's why I'm saying gold for me is a multi-generational tool. Like, I might never enjoy that, right? I do enjoy coffees, and if you guys want to, if you guys want to buy me some coffee, there will be links in the description and whatever. But I really enjoy having long talks with you guys. So you really have to you have to be smart, keen, and almost cunning about what you do if you want to keep the multi-generational um, wealth that you may have acquired or your parents may have acquired, because they want the middle class and upper middle class totally leveled, and they will have it. It's just, will you be one of them, or are you smart enough not to be one of them? And yeah, we'll see what happens. So, if you had enough gold, silver, or other assets to buy farmland or a homestead, could you feasibly hire workers and start generating perpetual income? How much is needed is the question. Yes. So the answer to the first part is yes. And how much is needed? I mean, you don't need to have much in order to get started. But right now, labor is super expensive. So you might as well start with your own efforts and just. So again, like owning too much property in your own name is a risk. Unfortunately, we're starting to live in a political arena where that is a risk. And I'm not saying like okay, owning like thousands of acres is a risk because it's not a risk. If you own that much, you're Bill Gates and you are part of the system and you're not going to be flattened. However, owning too much, unfortunately, people will be riled against you like you did something bad. So you have to watch out for that. But like homesteading and all of that stuff for me, it's good. Um, and yes, hiring workers. Actually, one of the benefits of owning land during hyperinflation is that you can hire or at least invite your own relatives to work and live there and not starve. So, um, how much? I mean, it depends where you live. I don't know where do you live? United States, South America. I have more and more friends moving out and picking up property in other countries. And they had an organic farm here, and it was just too much, too much. Eventually, the owner of the farm sold it. They were renting it, right? And they made a pretty good income, especially during the pandemic, where all the stores were shut down and they were organic chicken farmers and all that stuff. Very good stuff. We bought feed for them from them, organic feed, chickens, and all of the other stuff. It was just the climate was getting different. The price of the land increased so much, and it was intergenerational stuff that they had to deal with, and they had to move. So, I mean, if you can make it work, and we're trying to make it work, I think that's the best plan you can have. In a hyperinflation environment, gold and silver are extremely valuable, but my, as you say, my shrewdly safeguarded somehow. Well, yes, definitely. I mean, think about stuff like women had to take their earrings out, right? They couldn't wear jewelry because they would get attacked, right? And this was high moral society, 80s, 90s Romania, which had good social cohesion. So, because we're all people out of town from out of town, right? So, you have to watch out if, and that could have been, you could endanger your life with that. So you really have to, you really have to think about, um, how do you do it. The best thing is to not even have it with you, unless you actually need it, right? Um, yeah, have some lead with you, and even that is not good enough. Like you really need a plan. I talked about the four safes in one of my videos, and we can briefly go over it. Thank you, Ahmed's wife, for the coffee, by the way. Thank you very much. Yeah, the four safes is basically, you have to have a fake safe that you have that is easily can be easily found somewhere in your home that the smash and grabbers can take. It has to have some valuable in there, but not too much. Basically, it's something that you're prepared to lose, and it's fine that you lose it. You can even put a GPS tracking device in it if you want, and you can have have them caught that way. So that's a good safe, but it's actually a fake safe. You can buy that off of Amazon. It needs to be a cheap safe. You don't care about it. Then somewhat a relative okay safe. This should be a hidden safe somewhere, but still easily accessible for you to have the operational cash for 1 month, maybe expenses or 2 months expenses in your house in cash, in case something SHTF happens and you need cash in order to actually buy anything, because those who will have credit cards only and electronic payments only will be absolutely null and void if the electronic system goes down. So you have to have some cash, maybe just half a month expensive for food or something like that. And also near that, around that, of course, you have to have your quick access gun safe, the quick access one, right? You could have as many of those as you want around your house. Then the actual safe, which might not be even in your house, it might be in a different location, but it needs to be within a couple of hours reach, right? Where you could keep some stuff, I guess, if you want, right? And then the fourth one is basically a stash somewhere. It could be outside of the country, it could be a geocache, it could be something else that is like the multi generational stuff. And for that you need like whole plans on contingency, what happens with it if you die. And for that we can talk about encryption and other stuff, like how do you store geo coordinates, or how do you divide the secret between your children so that nobody has access unless everybody comes together, and then maybe your lawyer after you passed away, who gives the key to that and whatever. I mean, if you really bid, like have tens of millions of other stuff, we could talk about that if you're like a big guy. I don't think it plays for me, but like I am in software, I did a little bit of cryptography and other stuff, so this stuff is exciting for me to figure out, even if I'm not planning to use it. And diversify, don't have anything in one place. Yeah, so that's one plan, of course, right? But really, other safeguards is I don't want to say this like I'm not pushing it, but you can have um, like not safety deposit boxes. Those are, in my personal opinion, trash and will be first rated. But if it's like an outside entity somewhere in the not the Philippines, but like in maybe in Switzerland or some other country that has really good standing in not touching your stuff, and they don't even know what's in there, maybe you could use that, but not safety deposit boxes. So it's like at some point it becomes a burden, and it's just easier to pass on the skills and your lovable character to your children than money that would ruin them. And the stories, you have to pass down the stories. Yeah, looks like a lot of questions. I like it. Okay. So Ahmed's wife says, "You're welcome. You helped me too. I'm glad. I'm glad to hear that. I owe you because I have 50 pounds of sugar in my house." Yeah, and that's not even too much, to be honest. I mean, don't buy more unless you really need it. Like we're trying to actually cut down on sugar, but um, yeah, compared to the stuff like we bought, it was crazy. We had a extra storage. We bought a storage unit in order to store the stuff, that plus aluminum. So I mean, we're different times now, but um, yeah. Question: how difficult was it to get clean water? Yeah, for us it wasn't that difficult. I mean, we were in the Carpathian Basin, a lot of flowing water there, fresh water springs. Even in my hometown, we had like five or seven. The number has shrank because all the development going around, which is kind of sad, and now some of it's no longer potable. But we had that. Of course, the water system failed constantly, in the sense of the government couldn't keep it running, even though everything was run by the government. And it's different because now you're saying, well, that's why it's failed. Well, yes, but like private entities cannot keep those things up and running during hyperinflation, so it has to be nationalized. I mean, or if not, you'll be paying like thousands of dollars for a gallon of water, right? So government usually immediately nationalizes that stuff, sewer, water, electricity, and all that stuff. And the reason why they cannot keep it up is because they have to print fresh currency to pay the salaries of the people. So they cut it down. It's very hard. Like if it's a local government, it's even harder. If it's like completely nationalized up to the federal level, then they can keep it up. However, things go bad, you know. So it was constantly breaking down, but they did their best to keep it up, because if water and electricity goes down for a long time, revolution is here. So, and we already had a revolution in 89. Government didn't want to have another one. Now the newly formed government with the pretty much same people, uh, of course, except the top of the pyramid that changed, right? So they didn't want another one basically, and they kept it up as much as possible. The quality was bad, but it was up. Like you could flush the toilet, right, from time to time. But we had to have in the apartments. We had like those types of 55-gallon barrels that we kept, right, and potable water. And we carried water by hand from the natural springs. We went down. We walked. We had either like wheelbarrows, and we helped the elderly to bring up water into their like apartment, like the 10-story apartment building complexes that we lived in the cities. It was a bit harder actually for us in outside of the city, because our shallow well that we had on the homestead, well, didn't have potable water, but we could use that one for irrigation. So that was important. We used it for irrigation, and we had to go to some neighbors in order to have potable water, but we had like an arrangement. It was super easy actually. If you go to Transylvania now, or some parts of Hungary, um, Romanian Transylvania, or some parts of Hungary, your shallow well is usually put right in front of the house, not inside, because they don't have like open front yards. It's all gated, so it's all like high gates. Um, and basically, the well is put right outside, or between the fences. So basically, here goes the fence, then comes the well built around it, and then it continues, right? And it's usually made that way out of courtesy. So any walker by that goes in front of your house, they are welcomed, and they usually have a cup there, and they have to pull water with a bucket, and they will pour some, and you could drink. So that's like custom there, because you want to be nice to your neighbors and be a good Samaritan. So that's what we have in Romania. So like it was super easy as long as someone had some potable water, but we would also like compensate that with the tomatoes or some other stuff in one way or another. So it wasn't that bad. But in the United States, like I mean, if you live in Los Angeles, for goodness sake, like what are you gonna do? I mean, or uh, Nevada, Las Vegas. I mean, I have no idea what are you gonna do, man. It's gonna be horrid. What they have now, cops who patrol the streets of Los Angeles, I believe, where they fine you if you used irrigation to keep your plants alive. I live there, and I know, like in high, very top, fancy not apartment buildings, but like um office buildings, right? High story office buildings. I worked in there, at corner office, whatever. So there, and it was super nice. I loved it to some degree. Eventually, I had enough and moved from California. But anyway, so, and then there was some water shortage, and we could no longer, we were advised not to flush the toilet, and you would go into these toilets, and the smell, and I was like, are we in the third world? Like what is happening? Like, okay, I understand, but like it was so alien for me, coming from Eastern Europe, where water was like there, you know, it was just flowing. You could wash you could wash your rugs in it. Like we would roll up the rugs and you could go to the river and wash the rugs or whatever. I'm not saying that's the best thing, of course, but I mean, if you can't afford food, it's not like you're gonna pay someone to wash your rugs. So that was so strange for me, and that's normal. That's normal for them. And eventually, I woke up. You know, one morning I went in, I turned around with my chair, and I looked outside from that high story building. It was beautiful. Palm trees everywhere and concrete and palm trees. And all, I mean, up until the horizon, very flat, by the way, to up until the horizon, right? The other side was Hollywood Hills, if you could see that far. It was just buildings. It was just like concrete buildings, palm trees, a row, concrete building. And I thought, dude, if I would have to escape from here right now, right? All of this would be just a very, very wide wall that I would have to escape. How would I make it out? How would I, like, if I want to go to nature, or if I bike, I use my bicycle to get everywhere. I was like, there's no way you can get out of here alive. I have to get out. And then we moved. Like I had that epiphany or whatever you call it. I said, this is fun, but I don't want to be here a year from now. Yeah. What were some signs that they were going to be confiscating people's property? I mean, they tell you in the open. It's not like they don't tell you now. It's just like you just don't believe it. They tell you. They tell you. Um, Everybody knew, but it was like, no, I'm not gonna let it. Well, we'll see about that, right? So it was out in the open. As soon as communism came, everybody knew that some confiscation will be done, but you think, well, it won't happen to you. You own smaller properties. It's not like they're after you. They're only they're only after for the big farmers and all of that stuff. And and it's a normalcy bias that you don't think that there are evil people out there because you're not evil. So you don't think that they would be able to do that to you because you wouldn't be able to do that um, with them. So it's a normalcy bias. The signs are there. Now, will they have success this time? I don't know. Um, it's not so much the property they want to take. They can do crap. I don't want to use curse words, but they can do anything with the property. What happened? They forced you back on the property and they made you work. Basically, that's what happened with my grandfather as well. The property was now in the name of the state. You still had to work on it, but now you only got a share of what you worked for instead of you deciding how you allocate the capital. That's capitalism. You get to decide. Now there's predatory capitalism, what we have now. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying, like, if you own a farm and you decide what you use the capital for and how you use it and what you give back, minus the taxes, whatever, that's one thing. Okay, that's not good because we want high efficiency and we know exactly how we are going to do it because we have the measures, we have the indicators and the deep data, right? What this country needs. So what happens is that they take over, they have the planners come in, and there is some efficiency. I'm not going to say it's not. Like in some ways, it's much more efficient to put much more land together and have one entity. I mean, that's why global corpo exists, right? They take over and they do it. It's high efficiency. However, there's the direction. Defining the direction is bad because you're the biggest bear or consumer and producer altogether, and there are the fine measurements of what the people need in in order to have their little personal happiness, right? That is, you cannot measure that, right? You can have Twitter and you can do emojis, and you can data mine all of that crap. It still won't give you accurate stuff. What gives you accurate stuff is if I give you some money and then you can spend it on whatever you have, whatever you want. Concentrating and globalizing, or I guess communitizing, or building communism makes sense if you have, all of you have one common goal that is much more important than anything else. If you're in war times, there's the War Production Act or whatever, even the United States, right? So if you have one common goal to survive something very bad that is much more important than your long-term happiness, then it works because there's efficiency in that. The problems will arise. With that comes a lot of power, and power attracts SHT. SHIT attracts the flies. So now that power will attract all the corrupt people into government who make the decisions for you, right? And if you're a communist or whatever right now, I'm pretty sure the idea is perfect in your head, right? As it was in mine at some point, maybe, maybe not. The thing I'm saying is that there are no angels who can decide. There are no goody goody two shoes people who will do the best job that they can forever. Eventually, you will be replaced in your job, and right, all of those corrupt people who are now in the corporations that you hate so much, they're there because they're where the power is. As soon as you give more power to government, well, guess what? All of these crappy people will end up in your beloved government. And now what? Now you can't even choose anything else because there's only one government. At least here, you can choose not to use Google. You can choose not to use Global Corp or whatever, or you can just choose not to do anything. But when all of that it becomes in your government and becomes in your local school stuff and your police stuff, your police chief, and everybody becomes corrupt because the people who were right now trapped in the globalist corporation stuff because they're well paid and they're attracted to power, all of that becomes in your beloved government. Now it won't serve you anymore. I mean, um, I don't know how to make that clear. You have to really listen to what's the KGB agent? Somebody tell me the name. Yeah. So that's the problem. And by the way, it's out there. We came from the question of well, what are the signs? The signs are there. It's not like you don't see it. You just don't believe it. All right. I think that's it for questions. Oh, top two, three things you would have done differently as a family, knowing what you know now. I mean, yeah. I mean, the very first thing that I'm trying to do here as well is that when we moved to the homestead, it wasn't ready. It was breaking apart. I mean, the house, the land, everything. We didn't have tools, we didn't have anything. So the very first year was super hard for us. Because I mean, my at some point my grandfather lived there, he passed away, and then now we had to move there and it was in shambles. I mean, it was an old mud brick house without plumbing, right? Without, well, I mean, we had eventually electricity and gas. We had that put in. Gas was, believe, already there. So it was in horrible situation. Just preparing for that, then making sure that you have a place where you can go, where you can grow food prior than it hits the fan. I mean, that would have helped us so much. It would have brought everything forward instead of spending so much time now with no tools, no money, uh, no supply chain, and fixing all of that up. It would have been horrible. I mean, it was horrible. And just knowing the fact that you won't be able to thrive in the city. I'm not saying survive, people will survive, but you won't be able to get anywhere. And it's good if you can keep the heat on, keep the light on, and you don't starve. And that's a really good case if you can get that in a big city. So knowing that is very important, right? but also like we had the knowledge to grow food, right? We had that there. If you don't have that, that is very important. Or having the seeds, having the some preparedness. So we didn't have that. We didn't have tools. That's another thing. Um, yeah, some other stuff we would have done differently. I mean, I wouldn't change anything. I loved my early age and my childhood and everything afterwards. So I wouldn't change it. But right now, if I would be preparing for that same thing again, that's what I would do. Um, right. What else? Machines. Well, we would. I would like to invest in machines to make stuff easier. Right. Well, still, I would love to have. Would have been nice to have silver. We didn't have any, but it was sort of out of the question anyway. All of that was outlawed during communism. You couldn't have investment silver. Gold was strictly outlawed. You couldn't have wedding bands without government approval. So, yeah. So having some of that, so to be on the other part of the trade that we did, well, we were kind of forced into that trade, would have been nice. Not losing property during hyperinflation would be nice. And in order to do that, I think silver and gold would have helped, definitely. Um, yeah. So that's two things. Let me see if I can come up with a third one. Um, yeah, having to be honest, so I'm thinking if we would have had all of this, we could have produced more food, but commuting and doing basic transportation of food would have been really hard because of gas prices. So having vehicles like motorcycles would have been good, to be honest, or something like that for easy transport and cheap transport. We didn't have that, so making sure that we would have had some way of cheaper transport. Right now, my big bet, I told you, is around electric cargo vehicles, cargo bikes, basically, that I can just charge and go and sell the eggs or buy eggs and buy milk if I want to. So making sure that that is done would have been good as well. So transportation, I guess that also comes with energy, and yeah. The other thing would be, I mean, if we would have had all of this, um, in our case, what happened because the currency went down, the labor force was became so cheap, right? The the real estate became so cheap, it would have been nice to pick up during those times some real estate that we could use as shops later on. So technically, I still think one of the best investments that we could have had during those times, if we would have sold something, right? Gold, silver, food, whatever you can do, and you would have bought these very distressed commercial properties, shops, or that alikes of that on the edges of the city. So because okay, hyperinflation is over, eventually economic activity will pick up again. The city will start growing, right? And then those areas which would could be like really expensive now. I'm not sure if that will happen again. Like who knows with the population falling. I don't know what would be happening, but definitely picking up some more stuff and working more closely together with the Germans who came in droves to buy up everything because we became the cheapest. One of the, I mean, Ukraine, Poland, and some of those countries, right? But one of the cheapest labor force in Europe. So if we could have done something where we could have been a middleman between the Germans and other Eastern Western Europeans. Coming and exploiting our beloved Romania. Of course, investing in it as well. So, uh, if we could have been some middlemen between the inflow of capital and making sure that the labor force is not like taken too much advantage of, that would have been nice as well. And for that, you need competition. I mean, that's the only thing that drives it up. If you have only one Amazon, okay, you work at Amazon or you start. That's it, right? I mean, but if you have like 45 Amazons or likes of it, then you can compete for wage. You can go anywhere else that where you want. So that would have helped, like immediately getting into a situation where some of these big corporations or even entities, smaller entities, cannot just go and take advantage of your now little country that has fallen apart. So for that, we would have needed to have um, some bargaining power, basically. Okay, you want to invest? Sure, let's do this. This is the wage, whatever. So anyway, eventually it got solved. But right now, I mean, let's just be frank. If I'm not saying this will happen, but if the United States would fall, in the sense like something horrible happens, right? And okay, what are the entities that would be coming in right now if to invest, right? Because what has happened in our case, Romania government has fallen, it got reformulated, whatever. The Germans, especially the Germans, but maybe French and some other entities came in. They bought up all the factories. They restructured everything, and right, and started the economy all over again. If the Western nations would fall now, who would be coming in? So think about that, and maybe that you want to learn that language, or maybe okay. So or maybe you want some connections from them. I mean, there's reasons why who um I think Mark Faber, or who's the guy who says it. I mean, yeah, let's just be frank. A lot of people are sending their kids to learn Mandarin and some other languages, right? So, yeah, yeah, there's some other opportunities that you could take advantage of. And to be honest, I'm not blaming the Germans. I mean, they saw an opportunity and they came and invested. It wasn't their fault that Yuri Bezmenov. Okay, yeah. So if you really want to understand how some of the beautiful theories of communism work in practice, listen to Yuri Bezmenov. He was a deep in there, a KGB agent, and he tells it how it's really like. And okay, you can always say that's not real communism, and I agree. And there's nowhere you can find real communism, and there's nowhere you can find real capitalism. It's just, do I really want to bet on your capabilities of implementing the perfect system that is only existing in our heads? Because if they, yeah, then why don't you bet on my perfect system? I have perfect systems in my head as well. We can all just do like Star Trek. No money at all, right? Try that in your family. If it works in your extended family, let's give it a bigger try. Question: did any mortgages or loans? Log. Okay. I mean, yeah, why not? Did any mortgages or loans owned by the bank get forgiven at any point? The answer is no. It never got forgiven, but it was super easy to pay it off as long as you got foreign currency early enough and you held it, and then you just, when everything hyperinflated, you exchange the foreign currency to the local currency where in which you had the debt that was depreciating. So give you the really stupid example, but it works. Let's just say, and okay, I'm gonna mention Bitcoin. Like, don't immediately go away. But I'm saying like that's a real example. So that's a different currency, right? I'm not saying Bitcoin will go up. Who knows? I think it will not. But anyway, not for some time anyway. So if you have a currency called Bitcoin, in this case, in our case, it was the Deutschmark, right, or US dollars. If you have one currency, but your debt is in US dollars, right? Your mortgage is in US dollars. You know the US dollar will depreciate. So you have 30, let's say you have $300,000 worth of debt, and a price of a bread loaf will be $50 or $100, or let's just say $1,000, right? So that what happened to that debt? Now that debt became 300 loaves. So that debt became 300 loaves if it was a fixed debt. If they do some tricks, which your politicians might do, which they did try in our case as well, they want to, like, okay, fix that, no, fix that, we're gonna re-evaluate everything and put it in the new currency and increase your debt now with 20% per year. So they're gonna try something. So but they, most likely they will be, but they're slow. So there will be an opportunity, a window of opportunity, if you prepared enough for it and you know what's happening before they restructure everything. You can take advantage of the difference between your falling currency and your debt is established in, and whatever you were holding, which could be gold, could be another currency, could be land, could be gasoline, barrels of gasoline, whatever. So you have something that will appreciate a lot compared to your debt. And if you say, okay, that's good enough, I'm not going to take more risk, because they're coming up with schemes now, because the banks and governments are hand in hand, I'm just going to pay it off right now. And that's what most people did, who I know, who just, okay, they were able to pay off a 15-year mortgage debt with 2 months of labor. Okay, but it wasn't easy. Like during everyone starving, and you had to collect a lot of Deutschmarks during those time where you were starving. But you did it, and you paid it off, and then that's how you did it. So there, my guess is that it will be opportunities like that. But even if it doesn't, and inflation just continues at 10%, 15%, your debt is being eaten away. So that's why I had Jason Hartman on. Like that's his whole shtick, and which is smart. I don't know what happens in deflation with the trick, but anyway, it works. Debt destruction works because that's how government destroys its own debt. And if it does it, you'll have some like just when the lion eats, the hyenas can eat afterwards, I guess. So you'll be able to pick up some crumbs of that. And you most likely, if you can hold it along, you have to hold it during the during the deflationary phase before the hyperinflation. So because there's a deflationary phase, and that's what most likely happening now. Maybe nothing will happen, I don't know. But we looked at the chart of hyperinflation of the Weimar German mark, right? And even then, there was a 5 year gap, 5 year gap where actually gold went down before it went up. So it like tenfolded in price, then it fell back to half of it, right? It lost half percent, like 50% of its value. A huge deflation before it hyperinflated, because hyperinflation is usually comes from an overreaction of the Fed, right? They're the only ones who are printing money. They overreact, nothing happens because they're pushing on a rope, but eventually it floods the system, and then it all comes rushing back, and at that point it's too late. So you have to hold it through that initial 2 year period. So you have to make sure that you have enough cash stashed away to keep paying your loan, um, even if you have no renters, even if you have no personal income and you're starving, you still have to pay that debt. Because if not, you'll lose the property even before you get to the opportunity of hyperinflation eating the debt away. So that's the tricky part. You have to watch out. I mean, you have to watch more. We have to watch more stuff of my videos in order to get the in depth of it. But that's the short answer. That's a really short answer. Jim Rogers, yeah, you guys know everything. Like we're on the same tune. Yes, that's the person I was thinking about. Um, Jim Rogers, exactly. That's the quantum fund manager. Yeah, I should have told you that to make it easier. Yeah, yeah, Mandarin. Now, is it good? Is it not? I don't know. I mean, China seems to be in a lot of trouble, but I mean, to be honest, let's just say the Chinese work ethic is much better, to be honest. I mean, maybe they're being forced, I know, but I mean, even if Chinese immigrate here, like they're gonna be the best students. They're gonna be like you love them. Like it's absolutely great. So I'm saying that if you take a look at um I'll search for the video, but basically who's the who's the guy who brought gold back into Texas? Like, I'm really bad at names at nighttime. Um Anyway, there's some big cycles, and there's a war cycle, and there's an economic cycle, and there's a money printing cycle. And Kyle Bass, not Kyle Bass, um, maybe he was the one. Okay, hedge fund manager, Water, not Water. What's the hedge fund manager from Texas? I believe he's from Texas. Principles, the book Principles, he wrote. Ray Dalio. Maybe I'm mixing it up. But yeah, Ray Dalio. If you take a look at Ray Dalio's Principles book or video, yes, Ray Dalio. So he has like a 25-minute video on principles on YouTube where he kind of talks about global monetary systems, like from the Dutch when they invented capitalism to the Spanish to the reserve currencies and how they are changing and what are the events that are um, happen before a major shift happens into where global power shifts from one nation to another. And basically the cards are all out at this point. It's just like somebody taking the mantle and giving it to someone else. Everything other than the last war, which sometimes happens, sometimes doesn't, like the Dutch English War or the other like wars, not the Dutch, the Spanish English War, and some other wars happen, or the Second World War, after which the de facto currency became the U.S. dollar from the British pound, which they didn't fight, right? But there was a war. There's a war cycle. So look at that. And basically, that's why he's teaching Mandarin to his kids, of course. Yeah, that's a good comment right there. If the government takes your property, it doesn't mean that they take over the mortgage. Yeah, look at the scheme that Australia came up with. Like, government is there to help you purchase your house, right? And they own some of that, but all the responsibilities are yours. It's like now you have like two landlords. Even if you own the property, you have the government and the bank, and they have some weird stuff like what you need to do in order to make sure that their investment doesn't go down in value, right? And everybody owns the house except you, the owner, and you still get to pay um, the mortgage for 30 years, right? And then a lump sum or something like that, which is crazy. I mean, look it up. Something like that is actually also implemented in Romania right now after the financial crisis. Basically, basically no one is good enough to buy a house, absolutely no one. So the government has to step in and guarantee, like a student loan is guaranteed, that you cannot ever default from it, and by the cracking of the whip we'll get that money back. In steps government to help you buy a house, but it will guarantee the bank that will make him pay no matter what. Basically, that's the deal. And that's what happens. So what they do is you sign it away that yes, like just like a student loan, there's no way out from you from it. So like that's it. You'll have to pay. Now with student loans and other stuff with hyperinflation, just before hyperinflation, my theory is that they will actually forgive it because it's going to crap anyway. It will be nothing. It will be loaves of bread soon, but they can score political points from the youth basically to convince them over to do interesting stuff and like bull pot or some other stuff. Anyway, yeah, so I like it. Yeah, principles for dealing with the changing world order. That's the video. Look it up, Ray Dalio. It's like you'll understand so many things from that video if you like if you don't know it yet. But it's like even if you think you know about cycles, it's really good to have that um concise, like compressed version of like how historically things have changed and what are the precursors of the final change that happens when a world reserve currency shifts to another nation. Well put together. Yeah, somebody mentioned Peter Schiff, Adam Schiff. Yeah, I like to listen to them. I think I mean there's some stuff I don't agree with, but even if you're a socialist, I think you can still appreciate Peter Schiff to some degree, right? Because he went down and talked with the people at Occupy Wall Street, and actually, I found that later. I was there as well to talk with them, uh, and some of the nicest people I found there. So it's not like um, I'm just saying this to it, I mean, the goals are the same. Whether it's just the solutions we tend to disagree on, right? If you have more monetary, if you study monetary history, if you studied political history, if you studied a bunch of other stuff, you'll put together some own like theories of how we can solve the problems. But it's not like we disagree on the problems, right? So that's why I kind of talked with them and some of the nicest people, but I think the whole movement got hijacked. All right. I think that's it for today. A lot of political stuff, opinions, no financial advice. Don't take political opinions too seriously. They change. Guess what? You'll have a different opinion in 2 years than what you have now. It's all just for conversation. All right. That was a long stream, but really good stuff. All right. Thanks, guys. Yeah, we should do this more often. I'm super fun. So thank you guys. Like the video if you haven't. Share and subscribe, and see you next time. Bye.